I made a really, truly terrible real estate deal, at least according to someone on social media. And today I'm going to use the story of investing in a country where the currency dropped and conditions look worse to tell you how you can still come ahead by investing overseas even when things look bad. So the first thing, whenever I see these people on social media being critical, is this is why I left the United States. This is why I live a very intentional life, to avoid people who are deeply angry and like to try and find fault with everybody else. Because, as I'm going to explain today, even investing in countries where it would seem like it was a bad deal can work out very well for a couple of different reasons. So somebody said, when I bought a property in Bogota, Colombia, I bought that in 2019. And I made a video. I showed you the property. I wish I hadn't eaten so many tacos in Mexico the month before, but that was when I bought the property. And so basically saying that, hey, you bought at the top of the market, and why are you even telling us about this? Because you got double whacked on local currency terms and the purchase itself. And so if it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We help 7 and 8-figure entrepreneurs legally and dramatically reduce their taxes, protect their assets, increase their freedom, and grow their opportunities internationally. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. This deal in Colombia, you would think, because in 2019, the peso was about 3,500 to the dollar. It is right now about 4,700 to the dollar. Over the last year, it has averaged around 4,000 to the dollar. That's a place where it's been for a while, okay? So I bought it at 3,500. One of the things that you can do, by the way, is when you see currencies dip, because not all these currencies stay down forever. Some just kind of keep going down forever, and some kind of have ups and downs. You can use services like Wise. You can use private banks that allow you to hold foreign currencies. You can use brokerage accounts in local countries like in Colombia. You can send in your hard currency, and you can exchange when interest rates are worse. And so just because you bought at a certain point, a recent deal I did, I took advantage of having the currency ready to go at a point when it was at a multi-year low, and then when it came back down, I was still able to buy the property at that old value. So that's a separate thing you can do. But I bought in 2019. And what did I get by buying that property in Colombia in 2019? I got something that no longer exists. I got permanent residence as an investor who invested $650 monthly minimum wages into property. And so then I did not have to go through the temporary residence process of having to live there for 180 days a year and having to thread the needle between tax paying at 183 and actually living there for 180. The bigger issue for me is I'm happy to be an investor in Colombia. I'm actually happy to spend some time there. I have some interests in South America, and I've used that home as a base to explore them. But it's not a place where I want to spend the majority of my time. And so the government said, come and buy property. We'd love for you to bring your money into the country. Bring your dollars, bring your euros, we'll give you permanent residence. That program no longer exists. And so if I would have waited for the currency to reach 4,700 to 1, I wouldn't have been able to access that program and be able to work towards potentially an additional citizenship, certainly have a permanent residence that I can keep the way the new law appears to read for as long as I want, as long as I maintain that property, have access to come and go from Colombia when I want, be able to bypass certain rules, like for example, during the pandemic, residents had special status that tourists didn't. So that for me is one of the big reasons why, as a nomad capitalist, you want to invest in properties, because we're constantly seeing these friendly immigration deals go away. Paraguay recently canceled its easy permanent residence program. At least it appears that they'll cancel after suspending it. Golden visa programs go away. They raise the requirements. They change things. They make it harder to comply. They make it harder to keep. And so there are times when if you want the immigration, the diversification, the flag planting, as we call it, benefits, you are going to pay a little bit more. And so the way I look at it is if I'm buying a property and it were to go down $20,000 or $30,000, if that means that I can get a citizenship after 5 years, if that means I have access to a country, heck, in some cases, that means for me and my lifestyle, I have a place to live in a region where I'm doing some business. I've gone to Panama, I've gone to Uruguay, I've gone to Chile, and I've gone to Mexico for various business reasons, using that home as a base, and it made things easier. Is that worth losing a few bucks? I would happen to say it is, because I keep my lifestyle real estate as a low single-digit percentage of my accessible net worth. And so for me, getting benefits of permanent residence in a country like Turkey, you could use that to get citizenship. I'll talk about Turkey in a minute. So getting residence and citizenship is worth something. And I believe if you are a 7 or 8-figure entrepreneur, that lifestyle has some value. I see people making a common mistake where they want to try and have a number of different objectives with one property. So they want to buy a property, they want to use it when they're there, they want to Airbnb it, they want to do like 5 different things with it. And my perspective is, if you can afford to do so, buy a property, let it sit, keep your clothes in the closet, keep everything the way you want to do it. You will gain a better lifestyle advantage by doing that and having things ready for you. Because if you're running a successful business, you don't want to be screwing around with like, did the cleaner come and clean the last person's stuff out, or did someone bash something into your wall? Like, that's a distraction to collect an extra $5,000 or $10,000 or $12,000 a year in some of these places. And then you've got to file a local tax return, it's taxable, and there's a lot of hassles. And so for me, lifestyle is also worth something. And I think that's something that's worth considering. Again, residence and citizenship by investment. And for me personally, research and development is important because I was able to go out and basically tell our clients a very difficult market to buy property in Colombia. It is confusing. It is complicated. When you go to a closing in Colombia, you sit there and some beautiful voiced guy translates like an 80-page contract, and you just sit there for hours and deal with that. So I am the personal R&D machine. Don't get any credit for it, according to this guy, but I wanted to share the experience of buying something. And you know what? When you do R&D, sometimes you lose some money. You probably shouldn't do that unless you're running a YouTube channel telling people about property overseas as well. But sometimes you do a bad deal. In Malaysia, for example, almost 5 years ago, I got a bad deal, and I probably lost 15 to 20% on that property and a little bit of money on the currency. I did the deal when the currency was at a low. The currency is a little bit weaker now. And so that was a bad deal. And I've learned from that Malaysia is a place to buy property for lifestyle. You're not going to see a lot of appreciation. But here's the other thing on what happens when properties go up and down. Number one, you'll see in countries where they want US dollars, if you buy property in a good area, you can often beat the market. And so this is where some of the Warren Buffett principles come in of buying a wonderful business for a fair price, not a fair business for a wonderful price. And so I've kind of applied that somewhat unwittingly in the last couple of years. And now that I'm following Warren Buffett more closely, I am applying it wittingly. So number one, I'm buying properties in a place like Bogota or Istanbul in the best neighborhoods that have demand, that have international demand. And when someone comes into town from overseas, they're going to want to buy in that neighborhood. I am buying in buildings that have lower costs, lower carrying costs. I am buying in places that attract an audience that is a little bit more well-heeled, for example. So I'm not buying anymore like Airbnb style buildings. I'm buying in places where people would actually want to live there, good security guards, good maintenance, like everything works. And so if you buy that, there's only going to be a certain supply of that in a market like a Bogota, for example. They are building more inventory. But even when you have political changes, yeah, there are some people selling their property, but I can tell you from experience, there are fewer for sale signs now in Bogota than there were during the pandemic. So people think, oh, they elected a left-wing president. I know a lot of Colombians that aren't really that worried about it. They think it's going to be like what happened in Mexico. And there's going to be some mild changes and some mild tax changes, but they're not super worried about it. It's whether they're right or not. That's the consensus among a lot of folks that I talk to. This idea that because people in the United States don't like the president that Colombia just elected, that everyone in Colombia is going to start dumping their properties. I'm seeing a lot fewer people trying to dump property now than, let's say, a year and a half ago. And so Warren Buffett would say the same thing as well. Like, I mean, you don't want to rely on just every kind of politician that comes through. Colombia was very US friendly, very right wing for a long time. And so people are still buying properties. People are still coming. You're in the fifth largest city in the Americas in this case. But so the point is, have the fundamentals that work, and the rest will take care of itself. What I've seen in Istanbul, for example, is I was able to make about a 14% annual return in the almost 2 years that I've owned the property there. And that's after calculating the currency taking a dive. That's after calculating high inflation in Turkey. And so the same principles have largely applied when I got a appraisal recently in Colombia. Now, some of these countries, the appraisals aren't going to be as hard as what you'd expect in the United States, since there is some variance. But the idea is that in US dollar terms, I still have a nominal gain on the property. I didn't buy it as a gain. I bought it because I believe long-term that South America is going to be a more important part of the economy in the world. I have South African equities in my portfolio. They've outperformed a lot of Western equities in the last year, partially because of Brazil and partially because of the currency there. But I think that Colombia is very well positioned. I think the property is very well positioned. And so I think if you have the right fundamentals, you're going to do well. I've talked in Turkey, for example, about how my property has done very well, yet other people who are buying properties for citizenship alone, who don't really care about the property, who aren't following these metrics, might be losing 50, 60, 70% of their value. We've seen that historically from people who bought properties in the previous citizenship program. It was $1 million. They bought $1 million property. It's now worth $250,000, $300,000 because they just bought whatever looked appealing. I'm actively trying to buy things that maybe aren't looking as appealing in terms of the sales pitch, but that have the fundamentals of being in the right neighborhood. And so if you do that, what's happened is there's been a nominal gain in US dollar terms, even as the Colombian peso has gone down, and even as people who are looking from the outside trying to read into the politics. Other people having the same experience. So George Gammon talked at Nomad Capitalist Live. He is looking for property to buy in Colombia. Yes, the currency is lower now, but he still believes in the growth of the country. I've seen other people, I've talked to other people who are getting very good yields on property. And so my yield isn't as good as George's might be, but I could get about 9% yield on a property. That's harder and harder to get. It may become easier in the Western world again as your property prices come down, but my property price in US dollars, again, small gain, 9% yield, you're not going to get that anywhere else. And I think part of what people like George and I and others like about a market like Colombia is you just don't have as much mortgage. And so you're not going to see as dramatic of drops, even though there may be political factors in the country. And so for me, as I do this more and more, get away from high yields. Colombia has some of the higher yields out there, but I get more to what's valuable in the long term, not only from a lifestyle perspective, not only from teaching me for R&D so I can help you guys do this, but what is going to be the in-demand location, the in-demand property, what is going to hold its value, and not trying to get everything at a discount, not trying to jack up yield as high as possible, but trying to have sustainable growth over time, because I am holding things for the long haul. If I look when I'm going to be 68 years old instead of 38 years old, and I say, where's Colombia going to be in the world? I'm governed by the fact that look at it was when I was 8 years old versus where I'm 38 years old, and substantially better. Colombia, for example, recently got visa-free travel for their passport to the UK. By the way, not a bad reason to have a property that gives you permanent residence, that leads towards citizenship, that you can then go to Europe, go to the UK, have full access to living in South America. That's pretty powerful, and you would pay something for that, on top of the fact that you had a home you could enjoy that had very low carrying costs along the way. But I'm saying in the next 30 years, you're going to see more of the stigmas about Colombia fade. The fact that the UK is giving them visa-free travel is a dramatic step because the UK is rather particular in who they grant visa-free travel to their country to. It is one of the few countries that has a lot of citizens who need to get a visa just to fly through. And so the fact that Colombia is now on that list, to me, speaks to the stigma falling apart. 30 more years, you're going to see dramatic gains. What I paid for this property was under $1,600 a meter. Maybe you could have gotten something in Tbilisi, Georgia for under that price then, but you can't now. In Istanbul, in the best neighborhood, I paid substantially more than that per meter. And so to be in the creme de la creme neighborhood at that price, I just say, I'm going to wait. I'm not in a rush. And I'm no longer buying things, again, with such a small percentage of my net worth. I don't advocate people go and put their entire portfolios in Colombia. But I think that if you take a small percentage of your net worth and contribute that to lifestyle property that builds up your residence and passport portfolio, that gives you access to live in different places. If you spend some time there, you'll pick up on things that are happening in that part of the world, which can potentially go into your business or into your investment portfolio. When I go to Colombia, I get insights into what's happening in Latin America that I wouldn't get living somewhere else, and I can use that property to do that. And I'm more likely to go there because I have a property. I don't want to stay in a hotel. And so I can see how do we expand our business into the Spanish-speaking world, for example, and I can see what the vibe is. So there's a whole number of different things that you get. But the point is, I want to buy value in top places around the world. And I think when you do that, whether it's in Colombia or Turkey, where I've gotten these appraisals that have shown some growth, whether it's small in Colombia or larger in Turkey, there is a benefit to doing that. You're going to get it wrong sometimes. And listen, you learn more from doing it wrong and not making that mistake again. Look at Malaysia, you've got tons of supply for property. It's really hard to get property growth in Malaysia. And so I learned that on the first property. And that was a lesson learned. You don't have as much of that problem, certainly in Istanbul right now. Prices are going crazy. There's almost no good inventory. Bogota, more inventory, but it's still done all right. And so those are the factors that I'm looking at when buying property overseas. Don't conflate lifestyle investments that help you build your diversification with actual investments. There are people who are making actual investments in Colombia right now, and they have such high gains in pesos that they're concerned about tax liability and then taking it back into dollars, for example. And so people have done very well on properties there. They continue to do very well with rentals. And so I think Colombia is actually not a bad market to invest in property, especially now with a lower price point. But I'm happy to have bought at a worse price point for all those reasons.